Hi, welcome to First Look. On this week, let's see, what is this week? Anything going on? Not much comes to mind. It's Holy Week. It is what it is. It's the power and what's beautiful and what's wonderful and what's crazy and what's overwhelming about faith and church all at the same time. And I also have to make sure that wearing fun colors and just doing all the things that we do for Easter. So thanks for kind of joining us in the crazy of that and participating in the ways that you will. This week, just as a reminder of what this entails, if you're a Northmont person. First, Monday, Thursday is something that we do with our 319 friends. And so you're invited to either attend the service at Highland or the service at Wexford. I think I've been in Highland last year, and so I'll probably be at Wexford this year. And then we host Good Friday. So Good Friday has a potluck at 6 p.m., which you're all invited to join. There's some instructions that you've gotten. If your last name is this, then you bring this. If your last name is this, then you bring that. So that potluck is at 6 o'clock on Friday, and then the service at 7. And then the Easter service as normal. There is a Boy Scout breakfast on Easter Sunday, so please be aware that that is true, and try to let us know if you're coming. That way we can let them know how much to make. So we just had Palm Sunday yesterday, and if you've been kind of following along over the last few years here at Northmont, we do something we call a Palm to Passion. So we kind of try to cover that whole story from Sunday to Friday. So we start with Palms, the Parade of Palms, the story, and then we move into the Passion story. And what I really like about that is we get a chance to see kind of all of it at once. It's not just in pieces, but you kind of get to step back from it and kind of see a lot of things at once. And I was thinking about that as I was looking at the Easter story for this particular Sunday. And what I'll do is I'll do that thing where I'll pause. That way you can look at the story itself. So we're in the John story. So John chapter 20, verses 1 through 18. So this version of the Easter story, there's an empty tomb. Women go to get some of the disciples. They run back. And then Jesus appears to Mary Magdalene in the garden. And there's a kind of some confusion. And then finally, Mary recognizes Jesus after Jesus reveals himself. And I was thinking about the story. And so let me pause so you can read it. So I'll do the pause. 1, 2, 3, pause. Okay, now you've read the story. So in that story, you have Mary Magdalene kind of in this moment of discovery. But she's been kind of able to follow along with what's been happening. Obviously, she knows very clearly where we are in the Jesus story. Was there, the weeks leading up to, and knows about the crucifixion, and knows that he is dead, and knows that the disciples are trying to figure out what on earth to do now. Because clearly knows where to find them. Okay. And what I was thinking about was just the unique angle that they have in that story. Because they only knew a piece of it at a time, almost like an episode. In this episode, we have Thursday. In this episode, we have Friday. In this episode, we have Saturday. And now we have this conclusion on Sunday. But there was no way of getting instant information in, Palestine in, 2,000 years ago. So I was imagining being someone from, within the bounds of the kingdom of Israel, but not right there, not in Jerusalem, right? There would have been plenty of people who would have been in, Galilee or Bethlehem or something. And word of Jesus dying wouldn't have just, there was no instant way of doing that. There's no technology that would allow that to happen. I don't know how fast word spreads in a community like that, but my guess is that there were certainly people who heard this entire story. You won't believe what happened. This is what happened to Jesus. He was here, and then there was a trial, and then he was crucified, and then he was in the tomb, and earlier today, this happened. And we know that that's true because we see, like, the story after Easter of the Emmaus Road. We know that a lot of people would have understood what happened only in retrospect. They would have had the entire story at once and not in pieces. But we tell it in pieces. We tell the story as something that we sit with on Thursday, and then on Friday, and then on Saturday, and then on Sunday. All in very different ways, with different kind of modes. But what must it have been like to hear this story originally, all at once? You won't believe what happened. And my gut says that for some people, that was an amazing story. That was a life-changing story. Maybe they wanted to instantly get to Jerusalem to try to understand what was happening, like to get to understand how this affected them, or was this person really the Messiah, or like what happens now, or what were people's reaction, that kind of thing. Well, other people would have just gone on with their lives. That's something that's happening there. Maybe it affects me. Maybe it affects the way I feel. But nothing's happening. I'm still just, feeding my animals and tending to my household. That there's something that's kind of, it's an amazing story, but I still have to make dinner. And there's something kind of about that I kind of find amazing, and it kind of brings me a little bit of perspective. Because I was thinking about, I don't really have a comparison to something like that, something that would have stopped society dead in its tracks in a way that people wouldn't have been doing life in a normal way. Like I thought of, was the moon landing like that? Probably not exactly. It was an amazing thing, but again, people still had to tend to life. 9/11 was like that for me, in the sense that everything kind of stopped. Nothing about what was happening in your life continued as normal. There was no one that didn't affect. You changed what you did that day completely. Everything wasn't functioning in the way that it would normally be functioning. And I wonder if it was like that for a lot of people when they heard. Or did they really not know, like, Jesus was a story to them? And so, they had never seen Jesus in person. Maybe they had heard of people who had had these interactions with this person named Jesus, and maybe they were curious, or maybe they were, really enthralled by the story or whatever. But there would have been plenty of people who had never seen this person in person. And so the fact that he's now resurrected, that doesn't affect everyone in the same way. And of course, there would have been plenty of people who heard that story, who heard, I'm thinking, like, what if they were in one of those towns that maybe was near Bethlehem, or near somewhere in Galilee or something like that, and they just heard about it, some little town. What would that affect? What change would that have? It wasn't like something magical that happens, like that there's some kind of glow, or some kind of something on high, or some noise that we all heard, or something like that. That was something that happened in Jerusalem, and I heard about it. But nothing about my day-to-day life changes. And that would have been true for a generation of people, because what transpires moving forward would have only directly affected some people. If you think about the weeks afterwards, let's say between the Passover and Pentecost, people would have just left Jerusalem and gone back to their towns, and gone back to work, and gone back to their families, whatever. There wouldn't have been anything that happened that changes the dynamic of anything. Rome still rules the day. The Sanhedrin, they killed another prophet. There could have been propaganda or other information that came out from different sources. Oh, it ends up he was just another guy who, thought he could change things, and then they killed him, and because he called himself God. And other people who would have investigated. Other people who would have said, you know what, I need to understand what happened, because I heard about this person, and now they're gone, or now they're supposedly resurrected, and I need to understand what that means. But the reality is that Jerusalem, the temple, everything stayed exactly the same. And that would have been true for 40 years. People would have lived and died. People would have been born and died. People would have moved away. I mean, like, the world would have kept going around this situation. And that's something that I think we can probably relate to the most. Because when you kind of zoom in, right, when you kind of cut away everything but the story, it seems like the center of the universe. Jesus, this trial, the crucifixion, all of it. We think of it as sort of the center of the universe. Like everything would have stopped. But that's just not the case. And I think about that as something I can relate to, because, when I say this is Holy Week, all of you who are watching this, you're not watching this unless that really means something to you. There's something here that will affect the way you live the week out. You'll go to different services. You'll plan for a holiday. You'll plan for, maybe you've got people coming into town. Maybe you have people who are off from work, or, kids who are whatever, all sorts of different things. But for most of the world, for most of the people around us, it's just Monday. some kids are in school and some aren't. There's college basketball March Madness going on. There's things happening in Iran and other parts of the globe that are affecting people's lives in a great deal. TSA and our ability to fly and gas prices and all the things that people are dealing with. Like, all those things are still true, and they're true for you and I. But that's just what the world is responding to. World events, domestic events, things in their own lives, a regular work week, doctor's appointments, right? It all kind of fits in. And I think that's one of the things that is the hardest about something like Easter. Not just the fact that, I have services to plan and, to make sure I get all those kind of things in a row and do things well and that kind of stuff. But there's also the realization that what I do or what I think or what I feel isn't something that's universal. A lot of people feel that, but not everybody, and not all in the same way. And I think that's one of the things that faith, thinking through your faith really is a challenge. Because when we think about Christmas and Easter in some ways were obviously the two things that we look at the most when it comes to Christian holiday, special service, special season. And, that's real and true, and we should do that. In reality, Easter is certainly just from a faith perspective, is a much bigger deal than Christmas is. The birth of Jesus has not been celebrated as universally or nearly as long as Easter has, as the resurrection has. And it plays a much bigger role in how we identify as people of faith. But Christmas is the one that, more people at least have some understanding of what it is. And it really is the recognition that when it comes to the influence, when it comes to us trying to share or influence or put that faith story in front of other people, the details of what we do, why we do them, matter to us, matter to the people who are here, matter to the people who are watching this, matter to the people who are invested in church. The fact that there's, we make sure that the colors go in the chancel area, in the sanctuary, are changed from green to purple, and then purple to white, and then they're white until they're red, and then they're back to green. That matters, but only to some of us. The hymns that we choose, why we sing that one nowadays and not that one as much, matter to you and me, but not really past there. What I preach on a Sunday matters to some of you, but not to all of you, and not in the same degree. If I wear a tie or not, if we do this service project or this one, if we're Presbyterian or Methodist or Baptist or Catholic or whatever, all those things, if you're not really in it, you start to kind of lose a sense of why they matter. Christians get lumped together, just like Muslims get lumped together, or Jews get lumped together, or Americans get lumped together, or Iranians get lumped together, or Russians get lumped together. It's hard to pick out the differences from the outside, because the only thing that we have to go on is what we see from the outside, because the rest of the world is not going to pay attention as much as you want them to. And that's true for all the things I just mentioned. As much as we want to, we're not paying attention to what it means to live in Iran or Israel or Palestine or Russia or China. And me even just saying that, there's pieces of that we don't pick out, perspectives that we don't see. We look at this side of our face or the other. What it's like to live in the United States right now is different depending on who you are. And I don't want to be lumped in with one idea as much as you don't. Christianity is much the same way. People only really know some of the story, and some of it is only from the perspective of what someone told them. They're not going to dig deeper. And I think that's one of the things that I have to try to remember. If someone asks me what I do for a living and I say I'm a pastor, they only have their perspective of that. Because I've had many people in my life, after I've known them for a little bit, and then they ask me, oh, what do you do for a living? And I say, I'm a pastor. Some of them say, I would have never guessed that. And I don't know how to take that. I actually don't. I don't always know how to take that. And the thing is, whether I take that as an insult or as a compliment or nothing, has a lot to do with how I understand that person to interact with or understand faith or Christian faith or religion in general. So one of the things, we tend to, as Christians, hope and want and pray for the people on the outside of that faith to get it. We have an influence over, Christians traditionally have had a say in politics and in the way that government is run and the way that communities are run. And we wish that people understood it better. And a lot of people have spent a lot of time trying to do that. But realistically, that's not going to happen across the board. People's lives are not going to stop just because you say, I attend church, or I attend this church, or I have this background. They're going to make whatever assumption they're going to make. Which is why we try to emphasize over and over and over again, not a point of theology, not some detail that we need people to understand when it comes to the Bible or baptism or communion or whatever. 9 times out of 10, 99 times out of 100, if people are going to understand what faith is, they're going to understand it through their relationship with you. Not your ability to quote something, not your ability to represent faith in some big way. They're not going to care as much about what church you attend or what name's on the door. They're going to understand faith by where you show up, what you do, where you put your time and your funds, and how kind you are. I have had more people who have cared much, much more about the fact that I'm a pastor after they see me do something that they really value. Oh, you said something, you did something, you showed up at this thing, you care about this idea. I watched you be kind to that person or help that person or go out of your way for that person. And then they went, oh, and you did those things and you're also a pastor. That's when they say, well, where? And sometimes, that means something for Northmont. But usually it means I want to go to a place where the pastors are like that. I live here. Where should I go? I've been asked that many times in my life. I live in this place. What if I went there or there? Like, where would you suggest? Who else is going to be like that for me? Because it has very little to do with all of the answers that you have. The answers will come. What the difference between an elder and a deacon is, what the difference between a Methodist and a Presbyterian is, what the difference between baptism and communion here or there is. Like, all that will come. I want people in my life, community in my life that means something, that works for something good, and that promotes kindness in all of its forms. That's what Easter is. The other things come later. You have to do that part, because that's the only thing that matters to anyone who isn't there to watch it anyway. Okay, I guess that was a sermon. I don't really know what that was, but that was what I was thinking about today. So I'm glad that we can do this together. I'm glad that you're going to spend a little bit of time thinking about and getting ready for this Holy Week. If you need something along the way, please let us know. We look forward to seeing you at those things that I just mentioned. And between now and then, I hope you have a good rest of the day, and I'll see you next time for another First Look. So take care.